I'm Jan with JanPatekQuilts.com, and I do applique. Today I thought we'd focus on Natalie's quilt and learn how to do a few tips on how to do baskets and flowers that go in baskets. Natalie's quilt comes as a pattern, which you can buy, or we have a very few quilt kits left. People ask me all the time, where do you get your ideas? So I thought I'd tell you why this is called Natalie's quilt. I was over at Missouri Star Quilt Company visiting my friend Jenny Doan one day, and she showed me this really neat half hexie that her daughter Natalie had come up with the idea for, to make a piece quilt out of it using layer cakes, because you fit this on a layer cake. Well, they do piecing, but I looked at it and said, oh my heavens, it's a basket. All you need is a handle. So when I did the quilt, of course I had to call it Natalie's quilt. For this quilt, we'll go over a few of the supplies you're going to need. The first thing you need is freezer paper, and you can either buy it in a roll like this at Walmart or grocery stores, or you can scan the pattern page into your computer and print it off on freezer paper. And I really like this because I've gotten lazy, but we still use that a lot too. You're going to need a sandpaper board. This is the sandpaper board that we carry. You'll need marking pencils, and for this one I use the white one and the pink one. You can use any kind of marking pencils you want, but you need a pencil with, the reason I like these is they have a very fine end, a very fine point, because that's your stitching line. And if you use the chalk pencils with the thick line, then it can kind of distort your pattern a little. We needed silk pins, and you need Milner needles size 9 with a large, well, if you're me, you need them with the large eye so you can thread them. And then you need some applique glue, or you don't have to have this, but I have found it a real useful tool, and I'll show you how to use it. Here's the quilt block we're going to do today. There's 3 with this little flower. The other little flower is very similar, and the baskets are all the same because they're made with Natalie's wedge. The first thing we need to do, and you can go back to the first tutorial on the basics of needle turn applique, is trace the pattern onto freezer paper, cut it out exactly along the line, and then iron that on to your fabric piece. In most applique, you just kind of guesstimate your 1/4 inch seam, and it doesn't really matter, especially on a curve, whether it's a little thicker, some places a little thinner. But on this, at the bottom, where we're going to have to line the bottom of the basket up with the bottom of the block, you need to make sure this is a 1/4 inch, or your basket will be in the middle of the block or someplace else. So you use a ruler to do that and to mark it. I need my marking pencil back, and I use the pink one for this. The Sew Line apparently does have a pencil colored one. I like the pink better, and I really like the Sew Line better than using a pencil. A pencil would show up fine, but it would also, it's harder to erase than these are. It's harder to get that line off once you've sewed it on. And when you do the corners, do them a 1/4 inch, like this, because you're going to have to tuck all that under to get a sharp point. And if you just cut it off now. Okay, now what you need to do, that's where you're going to cut. Now what you have to do is trace this, because this is your stitching line, and this is really, except down here where it has to match up with the bottom of the fabric, this is your important line. This is where you're going to stitch to make your basket on your quilt look as the same as the basket and the pattern. So then you trace around the pattern all the way around, and this is why you use the sandpaper board. I'll probably say this every time I do a tutorial. These things are invaluable. They hold the fabric in place, making it much easier to trace your line and make your pattern, your applique piece, look like the pattern. Without those, and I used to do it without them, the fabric stretches. I mean, fabric does stretch. It's a good thing that fabric stretches, but it can be a pain if you don't have something to hold it in place. And then we just cut out on the outer, which should be a 1/4 inch out from your basket pattern. And you'll cut all the way around it, and you don't have to draw it on the handle. You can just eyeball cutting around the outside. Okay, so now we have cut all our pieces out of the flower, the leaves, everything. The basket is all cut out of freezer paper. It's traced onto freezer paper and then eyeballed for a 1/4 inch around on all the pieces. And now we're going to do the layout and put them together on the block. And we do this in stages. We need to put the basket on, lining the bottom where it's cut because we measured that one, and then just kind of eyeball this and make sure it's in the middle. It's big enough that it doesn't need to be real precise, and then line up the bottom of this with here. There's your basket. But in the block, which is here underneath all these things, we see that this piece goes under the basket. So we're going to have to take that into consideration when we sew our basket down, because we want anything that goes under the other one to be sewn under it. If you try to just butt it up to it, what's going to happen when it goes into the quilting machine is it will pull apart, and then you'll see a thin strip of the background after it's quilted, and you don't want that. So what we've got to do when we sew down this line of the basket is make sure we sew in our stem. And you can see we've marked the top of the stem on the pattern when we traced it with a little arrow, so we know which way is up. Now what we're going to do here is pull off the pattern, and here it is. Can't see things. I've threaded my thread. It doesn't have to match. This does. It's a basting stitch. And we're going to baste under both sides of this stem. Okay? So, yeah. And this is another reason you use the larger Milner needles. It's much easier to hold on to. The longer, they're not fat, but they're long. So you've got something to hold on to. Okay, so now you just baste under the end. You don't baste the whole thing in. Now, the same thing's going to happen with the handles. They've got to go under this part of the basket. So we take the ends on them and do the same thing. We baste under both sides. We basted the handles down and we basted the bottom of the stem down. These are the things that are going to fit under here. Now we need to take this and finger press it. You can get up and do it at the iron if you want to, but I never do. Turn it under along the stitching line so that it stays under pretty well. Okay, now line it up with the bottom again, and you've got this turned under. This goes here. That's over. We can look at our pattern and see that the flower's on this side. Okay, so we need to move that over a little so it'll go there we need to sew this to the top of this. And we'll do this not with a basting stitch, but with a regular, just a little hand sewn stitch. Just sew it across about 1/4 of an inch down. Now, that'll go under there. That's going to go up over the handle. Okay, now, not the thread again. Make sure this is in order and baste this to here. And what we're going to do now is, instead of using pins, I'm going to use glue. And I really like this glue because, unlike a stick, I can just peel this thing back and put a dot here, a dot here, a dot. Keep it pretty far back from where you're going to sew. You just want to hold it in place. You don't want to glue the edges down. So keep the glue back. And now see, you can just lift that up. And the same thing with your handle. Okay, now what we're going to do is sew this down. And we're moving to the sewing stage now. And I would not sew at a table. I don't sew at a table. I sew in a chair at night. I've done my prep work. This is now ready for me to sit down and watch TV with my husband. Well, really, he watches TV and I listen. Okay, so we've done all our prep work, and now it's time to sit down at night and relax and applique. So I'm down in the living room, not really, but close enough, and I have an armchair and I have a footstool down there because I've got to keep my knees up so I can keep my hand on my knees. And I also really like to have a wing. You don't have to have a wing chair, but if you have something to rest your arm on, it really helps. When you do your points, you're going to use this hand as much as you use this hand. So anyway, I also usually have a quilt. I get comfy at night, people. My husband keeps the house icebergy in the summer, so even in the middle of the summer I'll be sitting with a quilt in my lap. Okay, so we're going to applique now. Put our thimble on. Knot the thread, bring it up from behind, and here is your basic applique stitch again. You go in slightly behind where you came out. Go about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch and do it on an angle. You do not put your needle in straight down. You always put it on an angle. Bring it up, matching the thread. And I forgot to mention thread earlier as supplies, but you always need fabric and thread. Your thread needs to match the piece you're appliquing to the background. It does not need to match the background. Okay, so we're just going to tootle along. This, to me, hand applique is one of the most relaxing things in the world. If I didn't do this every day, my secretary bought me at Quilt Market one time when it was in Kansas City a little pin that says, if I didn't quilt, I'd kill people. Well, I don't think it's quite that bad, but doing this, I've done this every morning and every night for 25, 35 years. And I read something in Omni magazine once that said that working with your hands, I think it's the same thing as working in the garden. I think that's why we have so many flowers in our quilts. That working with your hands, whether you're working in the garden or you're making a quilt or you're doing something similar, the repetition triggers something in your brain that relaxes you. The repeated motion. And I think that's really true. I think that's really, really true. Okay, let's get up to the corner here. Peel this back and trim it off. Then you fold that straight across, and then you fold it under. So you have your point, and then you'll just go along here. And now we'll go ahead and sew our basket down all the way through here. And now we need to move on to the handle. And the first thing you need to do is fold this back and pin it out of the way. And when you're doing things like this, your board comes in really handy. Now, we need to take the handle, and on the inside of the curves of the handle, not the outside, because that'll make points. If you clip it there, instead of getting a smooth line, you'll get points. On the inside, you don't. It just eases the fabric. And so you clip it just up to the line. That's another reason that line is so important. You clip it up to the line on the handle. And now I've got a handle that I've sewed partially down. I'll go ahead and sew the rest of it down here for you to show you the stitch, how it goes on down, and then we'll go do some of the part of the outside, because that's where Jenny Doan said she always has trouble. She doesn't have any trouble with these inside curves. She has trouble getting the line smooth here. So we'll do a little of that for you too. Okay, so you just take your needle and smooth that under. And once again, it's the same stitch. It's kind of interesting. I mean, there's a lot of baskets in this quilt, but I think I started out, you just do a little every morning and every night, or I do a little every morning and every night. Now, I do enough quilts since I do this many patterns that I don't do all the applique myself. I've got a couple of other ladies that help me, that are a real help and expert appliqueurs, and then Felicia, one of the girls that works for me, does all the piecing. As I've said before, I'm not a very good piecer. I don't, somehow, when I sew all those little teeny pieces together, when we get done, they're not the same shape they're supposed to be. It's not a 12-inch square. It's a 12-inch square on one side and 11.5 on the other. But applique I can do. I like this. I can cut a 10-inch square here. Okay, take your needle and go under and go here. And this, if you get a point, which is what happens as you're going around the curve, finger pressing it in advance helps, and that's why this is good there. But if you get a point and there's kind of a little point there, you just go underneath with your needle and pull it under until it's where you want it, and then you take a couple of stitches. That would be a point if you left it alone. Don't leave it alone. Take your needle underneath and pull it under till you get it where you want it, and then start sewing it. Like I said, I listen to TV a lot. My husband watches it. And luckily we have a DVR, because every time there's something I really do want to watch, and I'll say, okay, hold it. Will you stop it and back it up, please, dear? I need to see that. Right. So now we have our basket sewed down, and we need to move on to our flower. The first thing we're going to do is just baste under part of the bottom edge of the flower and clip our curves for our flower, just like we clip the curves for the handle. Inside points only, not the outside curves. Okay, so we got our flower clipped. All right, we'll just kind of finger press that under and eyeball the middle of the flower and sew this on. And you just take your finger and once again, see we got a point there. It's those outside curves. Jenny's right, those are kind of almost harder than the inside ones. But you just push and pull with your needle, which is obviously why it's called needle turn applique. So now we've got our little flower cap sewn to the flower. Once we get that done, go to the back. I don't think I've showed you how I ended it, but if I have, it bears repeating. Just make a couple of loops, a couple of stitches, and then you can either cut it off there. Usually what I do is take it under and take it in between and bring the end out someplace that's not close to where you stitched it. Okay, we've turned down the points on both of our leaves, and we'll set them there and pin them in place and pin our flower in place, and then just start with the edge of this leaf, go around, come up the stem, come across, come down, stitch around that, and then stitch around the edges of the flower, doing our curves outside and inside the same way we did on the handle. There's also, I believe, on one of our earlier tutorials, we have a thing on inside and outside curves, so you might go back and refresh that. And then we have this block done. Okay, now that you know how to do baskets, one kind of basket, you can do just about all kinds of baskets. This cute little quilt is called Tic Tac baskets, and it's really, I love this size quilt because it's great to just put on your lap. And I put quilts on my lap every night when I sew. This is called Summer Nights, and I did that because when this quilt and these blocks made me think of sitting on the porch when it's warm enough, sitting on the porch or on the deck, and you can smell the flowers. And we live out in the country, and if you look up, we don't have city lights blocking. You can just see millions and millions and millions of stars, so it's really neat. This is basket patch, and what's neat about it is you do the top part with the curves and the flowers and the leaves, and then you sew it to a 9 patch. And the 9 patch is the basket, so you don't have to worry about any points on the basket. So it's mainly just curves and straight lines on that, except for the leaves. So anyway, now you've learned about all sorts of different kinds of baskets, handles, flowers, and we have kits, limited supply of kits on all of the quilts I've showed you today. We also have patterns for all of them, and we hope you've enjoyed this tutorial from Jan Patek Quilts.